Hey, I'm Hannah. I'm a writer, but sometimes I edit Twilight for fun and education. If you'd like some specific examples of how to write cleaner prose, or if you just want some retro wish fulfillment on your favorite shitty vampire series, this video might be for you. Today we're editing chapter 11. In our last Twitch stream, we did the compilation edits of chapters 6 through 10. So if you want the PDF of those, just sign up for the mailing list linked in my description. Also follow my Twitch for future streams. They're really fun because everyone's there to catch the typos that I don't and give suggestions for what should happen, like reasonable times for Bella to pull out her knife. If this is your first video and you don't want to watch the handy dandy playlist that I made for you of the rest of them, Jacob is Jasmine, Eric is Erica, Edward might die, Bella's kind of a bitch, Charlie is respected, and Lauren is really cool. I think that's all the important shit. Okay, let's get going. Chapter 11, Complications. Everyone watched us as we walked together to our lab table. I noticed that he no longer angled the chair to sit as far from me as the desk would allow. Instead, he sat quite close beside me, our arms almost touching. I think I'm gonna rephrase this. So instead, he sat close enough that our arms almost touched. I don't know why that vibe's a little better for me, but it does. Mr. Banner backed into the room then. What superb timing the man had, pulling a tall metal frame on wheels. Stephanie Meyer likes to put then in a lot of sentences, and that's not necessary. You're listing things in the order that they happen when you're writing a book. So yes, it's happening then. Mr. Banner backed into a room pulling a tall metal frame on wheels that held a heavy-looking, outdated TV and VCR. A movie day. The lift in the class atmosphere was almost tangible. Mr. Banner shoved the tape into the reluctant VCR and walked to the wall to turn off the lights. And then, as the room went black, I was suddenly hyper-aware. Okay, we don't need and then. As the room went black, I'm gonna take out suddenly. You almost never need suddenly either. I'm not an anti-adjective adverb kind of writer, but some words, like suddenly, literally just make it worse. Because if you want it to be sudden, you're warning the reader that something is going to happen suddenly, and that makes it less sudden. As the room went black, I was hyper-aware that Edward was sitting less than an inch from me. I was stunned by the unexpected electricity that flowed through me, amazed that it was possible to be more aware of him than I already was. I'm going to take out that sentence because I don't like it, and I think it's stupid. A crazy impulse to reach over and touch him, to stroke his perfect face just once in the darkness, nearly overwhelmed me. I crossed my arms tightly across my chest, my hands balling into fist. I was losing my mind. I'm gonna take out I was losing my mind because it's a bit much. I think I'm gonna take out as the room went black and be like, I was hyper aware. And we could say something more specific here, like Edward's elbow an inch from mine in the dark. The crazy impulse, take out crazy. The impulse to reach over and touch him, nearly overwhelmed. I'm gonna take out to stroke his perfect face also. Cause I crossed my arms tightly across my chest. My hands balling. I'm gonna put bald. The opening credits began, lighting the room by a token amount. My eyes, of their own accord, flickered to him. I smiled sheepishly as I realized his posture was identical to mine, fists clenched under his arms, right down to the eyes, peering sideways at me. The way that this is structured is kind of confusing, so fists clenched under his arms. So we can say, his eyes peering sideways at me. Okay, we have repetition of eyes, and also, it's his eyes that are peering, so we can just take out his eyes. I smiled. I'm gonna take out sheepishly because I hate that word. I smiled as I realized his posture was identical to mine, fist clenched under his arms, peering sideways at me. He grinned back, his eyes somehow managing to smolder, even in the dark. Never mind, I'm gonna take that out. Now we have no eyes. I looked away before I could start hyperventilating. Jesus. I looked away quickly. It's absolutely ridiculous that I should feel dizzy. Shh, babe. The hours seemed very long. I couldn't concentrate on the movie. I didn't even know what subject it was on. I tried unsuccessfully to relax, but the electric current that seemed to be originating from somewhere in his body never slackened. I think we can take that out. Occasionally, I would permit myself a quick glance in his direction, but he never seemed to relax either. Why is that but? How does her glancing at him contradict him not relaxing? The overpowering craving to touch him also refused to fade, and I crushed my fist safely against my ribs until my fingers were aching with the effort. Until my fingers ached. Take out overpowering, because it's not overpowering if she didn't do it. Craving to touch him also refused to fade. Okay, whatever. I breathed a sigh of relief when Mr. Banner flicked the lights back on at the end of class. I stretched my arms out in front of me, flexing my stiff fingers. Edward chuckled beside me. Just put Edward chuckled. Or I would take that out. And that was interesting. Edward chuckled. His voice was dark and his eyes were cautious. That doesn't mean anything. what the movie was? I'm gonna say that was an interesting film. So he's like pretending that he watched it. Was all I was able to respond. Shall we? He asked, rising fluidly. I almost groaned. Time for gym. I stood with care, worried my balance might have been affected by the strange new intensity between us. It's probably not that serious. He walked me to my next class in silence and paused at the door. I turned to say goodbye. His face startled me. His expression was torn, almost pained, and so fiercely beautiful that the ache to touch him flared as strong as before. My goodbye stuck in my throat. To be honest, I don't want that. Paused at the door. I'm gonna take all of that out. He raised his hand, hesitant, conflict raging in his eyes, and then swiftly, we don't need and then. He raised a hesitant hand and swiftly brushed the length of my cheekbone with his fingertips. His skin was as icy as ever, but the trail his fingers left on my skin was alarmingly warm, like I'd been burned. But I didn't feel the pain of it. I'm gonna take out yet. Maybe I like yet. Never mind, I like it. He turned without a word and strode quickly away from me. I was gonna say away, maybe. I walked into the gym, lightheaded and wobbly. I drifted to the locker room, changing in a trance-like state, only vaguely aware that there were other people surrounding me. Reality didn't fully set until I was handed a racket. Ooh, it's tennis time. It wasn't heavy, yet it felt very unsafe in my hand. I could see a few of the other kids in class eyeing me. We don't need that. Coach Clapp, that's still a very funny name, ordered us to pair up into teams. Well, yeah, ordered us to pair up. Mercifully, some vestiges of Mike's chivalry still survived. He came to stand beside me. Do you want to be a team? Thanks, Mike. You don't have to do this, you know. I grimaced apologetically. So this is a good example of how Stephanie just goes on for a few words too long, and it's like, okay, that's not how people talk, though. So you just say you don't have to. I might take out thanks, Mike, too. Most of the times that your characters address each other by name is gonna make your dialogue sound a little cheesier. Don't worry, I'll keep out of your way, he grinned. Sometimes it was so easy to like Mike. Wait, since when? I thought she hated Mike. It didn't go smoothly. I somehow managed to hit myself in the back of my head with my racket and clip Mike's shoulder on the same swing. That's funny. I spent the rest of the hour in the back corner of the court, the racket held safely behind my back, despite being handicapped by me. Okay, I know that that's a sports term, but I also know Stephanie Meyer's tendencies. I'm going to go ahead and take that out to be safe. Mike was pretty good. He won 3 games out of 4 single-handedly. He gave me an unearned high five and the coach finally blew the whistle ending class. So, he said as we walked off the court, so what? So what? You and Colin, huh? He asked, his tone rebellious. My previous feeling of affection disappeared. That's none of your business, Mike, I warned, internally cursing Jessica straight to the fiery pits of Hades. Okay. Relax. I don't like it, he muttered anyway. Shut up, Mike. You don't have to, I snapped. I don't like Edward, but I also don't like Mike, so. He looks at you like you're something to eat, he continued, ignoring me. This is what we talked about in the last video, where sometimes ending a line of dialogue on the dialogue is much stronger than adding a dialogue tag, especially because we don't need it. We already established the order of their dialogue. I choked back the hysteria that threatened to explode, but a small giggle managed to get out despite my efforts. He glowered at me. I waved and fled to the locker room. I think I'm just gonna say I choked back a giggle unsuccessfully. He glowered at me. I waved and fled to the locker room. I dressed quickly, something stronger than butterflies, battering recklessly against the walls of my stomach, my argument with Mike already a distant memory. I was wondering if Edward would be waiting or if I should meet him at his car. What if his family was there? I felt a wave of real terror. Did they know that I knew? Was I supposed to know that they knew that I knew or not? I'm going to take out I felt a wave of real terror because I think we're getting her discomfort without that. By the time I walked out of the gym, I had just about decided to walk straight home without even looking toward the parking lot, but my worries were unnecessary. Edward was waiting, leaning casually against the side of the gym, his breathtaking face untroubled now. We already have leaning casually, so I'm gonna take this very weird clause out. As I walked to his side, I felt a peculiar sense of release. Sometimes it's stronger to just not be so telly. Most of the time it's stronger to not be so telly. Say I joined him. We can give her some body language and my shoulders relaxed. That's not the strongest option. If I sat here thinking about it for longer, I could think of something like more characterizing or something for her to do. But having her shoulders relax instead of her saying, wow, I feel at ease now, is just a stronger way to convey that same sentiment. Hi, I breathed, smiling hugely. Hello. His answering smile was brilliant. How was Jim? My face fell a tiny bit. Fine, I lied. Really? He was unconvinced. His eyes shifted their focus slightly. looking over my shoulder and narrowing. You can say shifted to look over my shoulder. And he frowned. I glanced behind me to see Mike's back as he walked away. What? I demanded. His eyes slid back to me, still tight. Newton's getting on my nerves. You weren't listening again? I was horror struck. All traces of my sudden good humor vanished. I think it's weird that this is like a negative. So if we say you were listening again, I snapped good mood. I snapped my good mood snapping away as well. Or snapping away just as quick. How's your head? He asked innocently. You're unbelievable. I turned, stomping away in the general direction of the parking lot, though I hadn't ruled out walking at this point. What? I'll just say, I don't. He kept up with me easily. You were the one who mentioned how I'd never seen you in gym. It made me curious. He didn't sound repentant, so I ignored him. We walked in silence, a furious, embarrassed silence on my part. It's not that big of a deal. He's definitely done worse things. I'm just gonna say we walked in silence to his car, but I had to stop a few steps away. A crowd of people, all boys, were surrounding it. Then I realized they weren't surrounding the Volvo. They were actually circled around Rosalie's red convertible, unmistakable lust in their eyes. For the car or for Rosalie? None of them even looked up as Edward slid between them to open his door. I climbed quickly to the passenger side, also unnoticed. Ostentatious, he muttered. What kind of car is that? I asked. An M3. I don't speak car and driver. Is that a reference I don't get? I'm just going to take that out. Let me know if that's a reference I don't get. It's a BMW. He rolled his eyes, not looking at me, trying to back out without running over the car enthusiasts. Shut up, Edward. I nodded. I'd heard of that one. Can he ever just be nice to her? It doesn't seem like it. Are you still angry? He asked as he carefully maneuvered his way out. Definitely. He sighed. Will you forgive me if I apologize? Maybe, if you mean it, and if you promise not to do it again, I insisted. His eyes were suddenly shrewd. The eyes. How about if I mean it and I agree to let you drive Saturday? He countered my conditions. I'm going to take out the eye description. I would replace it with something else, but we don't need it. I considered and decided it was probably the best offer I would get. Deal, I agreed. Then I'm very sorry I upset you. His eyes burned with sincerity for a protracted moment, playing havoc with the rhythm of my heart. Shut up, babe. Then turned playful. And I'll be on your doorstep bright and early Saturday morning. It doesn't help with the Charlie situation if an unexplained Volvo is left in the driveway. His smile was condescending now. I wasn't intending to bring a car. Piggyback ride. How? He cut me off. Don't worry about it. I'll be there. No car. I let it go. I had a more pressing question. Is it later yet? I asked significantly. I'm going to take out I asked significantly because what does that mean? He frowned. I suppose it is later. I kept my expression polite as I waited. He stopped the car. I looked up, surprised. Of course we were already at Charlie's house, parked behind the truck. Why, of course? And why so many M-dashes, Stephanie? It was easier to ride with him if I only looked when it was over. When I looked back at him, he was staring at me, measuring with his eyes. Not with his eyes! And you still want to know why you can't see me hunt? He seemed solemn, but I thought I saw a trace of humor deep in his eyes. What? What are you talking about, babe? Well, I clarified. I was mostly wondering about your reaction. To what? Did I frighten you? Yes, there was definitely humor there. No, I lied. He didn't buy it. I apologize for scaring you, he persisted with a slight smile, but then all evidence of teasing disappeared. It was just the thought of you being there while we hunted. His jaw tightened. To be honest, I don't know what they're talking about, but this does happen a lot because I try not to listen to their conversations. I apologize for scaring you. That would be bad? He spoke between clenched teeth. Extremely. Because he took a deep breath and stared through the windshield at the thick rolling clouds that seemed to press down, almost within reach. When we hunt, he spoke slowly, unwillingly, we give ourselves over to our senses, govern less with our minds, especially our sense of smell. If you were anywhere near me when I lost control that way. He shook his head, still gazing morosely at the heavy clouds. I kept my expression firmly under control, expecting the swift flash of his eyes to judge my reaction that soon followed. What? Why can't any of these sentences be easy to read? I kept my expression firmly under control, expecting the swift flash of his eyes to judge my reaction that soon followed. Check this out. Wow, it means the same thing. My face gave nothing away. But our eyes held, and the silence deepened and changed. You know what? Right here, I wouldn't mind the word then. Maybe. Flickers of the electricity I'd felt this afternoon began to charge the atmosphere as he gazed unrelentingly into my eyes. It wasn't until my head started to swim that I realized I wasn't Jeez, I can't with that. Bella, I think you should go inside now. His voice was rough, his eyes on the clouds. Okay. His voice was rough. And his voice and his eyes and her voice and the volume of their voices and the way that their eyes are being held in their skull and their eyes and their voice. I just wrote a chapter. I opened the door and the Arctic draft that burst into the car helped clear my head. Afraid I might stumble in my woozy state. Why are you woozy? I stepped carefully out of the car and shut the door behind me without looking back. We can just say I stumbled toward the house. And that can be if the reader wants to think that she's lightheaded because Edward looked at her with his eyes. Or it can just be because she's clumsy. That'll work. The whir of the automatic window unrolling made me turn. Oh, Bella, he called after me, his voice more even. He leaned toward the open window with a faint smile. Where else would it be, babe? Where else would it be? Yes, tomorrow it's my turn. Your turn to what? He smiled wider, flashing his gleaming teeth, asked the questions. They're the most boring people on the planet, and I never want to see another conversation between them. Should we kill off Edward now? And then he was gone, the car speeding down the street and disappearing around the corner before I could even collect my thoughts. I smiled as I walked to the house. It was clear he was planning to see me tomorrow, if nothing else. What? That night, Edward starred in my dreams, as usual. However, what did we establish in that day? There was some weird sexual tension between them while they watched a film while he's pursuing his 90th high school diploma. He listened in on a conversation she had, which he's already done several times. Nothing new there. She argues about it, and he's like, sucks to be you, bitch. I'm not gonna stop. It's like, okay, why do we have to keep seeing the same scene happen over and over again? I'm probably gonna take the last few chapters and just condense them into one because nothing fucking happens. That night I restarted my dreams. However, the climate of my unconsciousness has changed. It thrilled with the same electricity that had charged the afternoon, and I tossed and turned restlessly, waking often. It was only in the early hours of the morning that I finally sank into an exhausted, dreamless sleep. The climate of my conscience has changed. I'm gonna take that out because I think it's stupid. When I woke, I was still tired, but edgy. I woke feeling more tired than I had when I went to bed. I pulled on my brown turtleneck and the inescapable jeans. What? You want to escape your jeans? Sighing as I daydreamed of spaghetti straps and shorts. Oh, it's cold. Okay, gotcha. Breakfast was the usual quiet event. I expected. Yeah, okay. Charlie fried eggs for himself. I had a bowl of cereal. There's no reason for these sentences to be connected. I wondered if he had forgotten about this Saturday. He answered my unspoken question as he stood up to take his plate to the sink. We don't need up or down in most cases because he stood. There's only one way to stand. About this Saturday, he began, walking across the kitchen and turning on a faucet. I cringed. Yes, Dad? Are you still set on going to Seattle? He asked. That was the plan, I grimaced, wishing he hadn't brought it up so I wouldn't have to compose careful half-truths. He squeezed some dish soap onto his plate and swirled it around with a brush. And you're sure you can't make it back in time for the dance? I want Charlie to have a dishwasher. I think he deserves it. He rinsed his plate and propped it in the top rack of the dishwasher, bumping the door shut with his hip. And you're sure you can't make it back in time for the dance? I'm not going to the dance, Dad. I glared. Did anyone ask you? He asked, trying to hide his concern by focusing on rinsing the plate, wiping down the clean counter. I sidestepped the minefield. It's a girl's choice. Oh, he frowned as he dried his plate. No, he has a dishwasher. He frowned and shook imaginary crumbs into the trash can. I sympathized with him. It must be a hard thing to be a father, living in fear that your daughter would meet a boy she liked, but also having to worry if she didn't. How ghastly it would be, I thought, shuddering, if Charlie had even the slightest inkling of exactly what I did. If Charlie had even the slightest inkling of exactly what I did like. It must be hard to be a father, living in fear that your daughter would meet a boy she liked, but also having to worry if she didn't. I'm going to take all of that out. Charlie left then with a goodbye wave. I'm going to take that out because it's weird. Where's he waving from? Just like at the kitchen? Charlie left and I went upstairs to brush my teeth and gathered my books. When I heard the cruiser pull away, I could only wait a few seconds before I had to peek out of my window. The silver car was already there, waiting in Charlie's spot on the driveway. I bounded down the stairs and out the front door, wondering how long this bizarre routine would continue. I never wanted it to end. He waited in the car, not appearing to watch as I shut the door behind me without bothering to lock the deadbolt. I walked to the car, pausing shyly before opening the door and stepping in. He was smiling, relaxed, and, as usual, perfect and beautiful to an excruciating degree. Hey, babe. Good morning. His voice was silky. Ooh, how are you today? His eyes roamed over my face as if his question was something more than simple courtesy. So this should be subjunctive, which means it'll be were. Subjunctive is like if you're speaking of something that could be or you wish would be or whatever. So like as if should be followed by were, even though question is singular. English is stupid and I'm so sorry. Good, thank you. I was always good. Much more than good when I was near him. His gaze lingered on the circles under my eyes. You look tired. Rude. I couldn't sleep, I confessed, automatically swinging my hair around my shoulder to provide some measure of cover. You can't see me here. Neither could I, he teased as he started the engine. He's a vampire. I was becoming used to the quiet purr. I was sure the roar of my truck would scare me whenever I got the chance to drive it again. I laughed. I guess that's right. I suppose I slept just a little bit more than you did. I guess that's right is a very, very alien thing to say for some reason. I'd wager you did. So what did you do last night? I asked. He chuckled. Not a chance. It's my day to ask questions. He watched you sleep, Bella. Oh, that's right. What do you want to know? My forehead creased. I couldn't imagine anything about me that could be in any way interesting to him. Okay, I'll leave it for now. What's your favorite color? He asked, his face grave. I rolled my eyes. It changes from day to day. What's your favorite color today? He was still solemn. Probably brown. I tended to dress according to my mood. He started dropping his serious expression. Brown? He asked skeptically. Hey, that is a valid favorite color. Sure, brown is warm. I miss brown. Everything that's supposed to be brown, tree trunks, rocks, dirt, is all covered up with squashy green stuff here, I complained. He seemed fascinated by my little rant. He considered for a moment, staring into my eyes. You're right, he decided, serious again. Brown is warm. He reached over swiftly, but somehow still hesitantly, to sweep my hair back behind my shoulder. Don't touch me. We were at the school by now. He turned back to me as he pulled into a parking space. What music? And then we could say something like, our drives seem to end quicker every day. What music is in your CD player right now? He asked, his face as somber as if he'd asked for a murder confession. Okay. I realized I'd never removed the CD Phil had given me. When I said the name of the band, he smiled crookedly, a peculiar expression in his eyes. He flipped open a compartment under his car's CD player, pulled out one of 30 or so CDs that were jammed in a small space, and handed it to me. The bussy to this? The bussy? He raised an eyebrow. It was the same CD. I examined the familiar cover, keeping my eyes down. Well, yeah. What? I continued like that for the rest of the day. While he walked me to English, when he met me after Spanish, all through the lunch hour, he questioned me relentlessly about every insignificant detail of my existence. Movies I'd liked and hated, a few places I'd been, and the many places I wanted to go, and books. Endlessly books. I couldn't remember the last time I'd talked so much. More often than not, I felt self-conscious, certain I must be boring him, but the absolute absorption of his face and his never-ending stream of questions compelled me to continue. Mostly his questions were easy, only a very few triggering my easy blushes. I'm going to take out a very because, God, only a few triggering my easy blushes. But when I did flush, it brought on a whole new round of questions, such as the time he asked my favorite gemstone and I blurted out topaz before thinking. He'd been flinging questions at me with such speed that I felt like I was taking one of those psychiatric tests where you answer with the first word that comes to mind. I was sure he would have continued down whatever mental list he was following, except for the blush. My face reddened. Because until very recently, my favorite gemstone was garnet. But now her favorite gemstone is the color of his eyes. It was impossible, while staring into his topaz eyes, not to remember the reason for the switch. And naturally, he wouldn't rest until I'd admitted why I was embarrassed. Tell me, he finally commanded after persuasion failed. Failed only because I kept my eyes safely away from his face. It's the color of your eyes today, I sighed, surrendering, staring down at my hands as I fiddled with a piece of hair. I suppose if you'd asked me in 2 weeks, I'd say onyx. I'd given more information than necessary in my unwilling honesty, and I worried it would provoke the strange anger that flared whenever I slipped and revealed too clearly how obsessed I was. Ew. His pause was very short. What kinds of flowers do you prefer? He fired off. I sighed in relief and continued with the psychoanalysis. Biology was a complication again. Edward had continued with his quizzing up until Mr. Banner entered the room, dragging the audio-visual frame again. As the teacher approached the light switch, I noticed Edward slide his chair slightly farther away from mine. It didn't help. As soon as the room was dark, there was the same electric spark, the same restless craving to stretch my hand across a short space and touch his cold skin as yesterday. I'm gonna take that out. because it's a little much. I leaned forward on the table, resting my chin on my folded arms, my hidden fingers gripping the table's edge as I fought to ignore the irrational longing that unsettled me. I didn't look at him, afraid that if he was looking at me, again, this should be were. If he were looking at me, it would only make self-control that much harder. I sincerely tried to watch the movie, but at the end of the hour, I had no idea what I'd just seen. I sighed in relief again when Mr. Banner turned the lights on, finally glancing at Edward. He was looking at me, his eyes ambivalent. I'm gonna take that out because it's really long. Edward rose in silence and then stood still waiting for me. We walked toward the gym in silence like yesterday, and also like yesterday, he touched my face wordlessly, this time with the back of his cool hand, stroking once from my temple to my jaw before he turned and walked away. I don't think we need any of those M-dashes. Gym passed quickly as I watched Mike's one-man badminton show. He didn't speak to me today, either in response to my vacant expression or because he was still angry about our squabble yesterday. So the use of today here is, and this is true, present tense. Somewhere in a corner of my mind, I felt bad about that, but I couldn't concentrate on him. I hurried to change afterward, ill at ease, knowing the faster I moved, the sooner I would be with Edward. The pressure made me more clumsy than usual, but eventually I made it out the door, feeling the same release when I saw him standing there, a wide smile automatically spreading across my face. He smiled in reaction before launching into more cross-examination. What's he cross-examining? His questions were different now, though, not as easily answered. Before picking up where we'd left off. His questions were different now, though, not as easily answered. He wanted to know what I missed about home, insisting on descriptions of anything he wasn't familiar with. We sat in front of Charlie's house for hours as the sky darkened and rain plummeted around us in a sudden deluge. I tried to describe impossible things, like the scent of what? Creosote? Creosote? I don't know what this is, I'm gonna be honest. Google it, though. Why did you know what fossil fuel smells like so well? Maybe I don't know enough about Phoenix. What are y'all doing in Arizona? Bitter, slightly resinous, but still pleasant. That doesn't feel true. The high, keening sound of cicadas in July, the feathery barrenness of the trees, the very size of the sky extending white blue from horizon to horizon, barely interrupted by the low mountains covered with purple volcanic rock. The hardest thing to explain was why it was so beautiful to me, to justify a beauty that didn't depend on the sparse, spiny vegetation that often looked half dead, a beauty that had more to do with the exposed shape of the land, with the shallow bowls of valley between it, the craggy hills, and the way they held on to the sun. I found myself using my hands as I tried to describe it to him. I think we'll just split this paragraph in half and call that a day. His quiet, probing questions kept me talking freely, forgetting in the dim light of the storm to be embarrassed for monopolizing the conversation. Finally, when I had finished detailing my cluttered room at home, he paused instead of responding with another question. Are you finished? I asked in relief. Not even close, but your father will be home soon. Charlie! I suddenly recalled his existence and sighed. Shut up. You should be thinking of Charlie at all times. I know I am. I looked out at the rain-darkened sky, but it gave nothing away. How late is it? I wondered out loud as I glanced at the clock. I was surprised by the time. Charlie would be driving home now. It's twilight, Edward murmured, looking at the western horizon, obscured as it was with clouds. His voice was thoughtful, as if his mind were somewhere far away. I stared at him as he gazed unseeingly out of the windshield. How you know he's not seeing anything? I'm going to take that out because I'm tired of knowing what they're staring at. I was still staring when his eyes suddenly shifted back to mine. Shut up. It's the safest time of day for us, he said, answering the unspoken question. In my eyes. I'm going to take out in my eyes. The easiest time, but also the saddest in a way. The end of another day, the return of the night. Darkness is so predictable, don't you think? He smiled wistfully. I like the night. Without the dark, we never see the stars. I frowned. Not that you see them here much. He laughed, and the mood abruptly lightened. Charlie will be here in a few minutes, so unless you want to tell him that you'll be with me Saturday, he raised one eyebrow. Please tell him. Can you tell him? Thanks, but no thanks. I gathered my books, realizing I was stiff from sitting still too long. So is it my turn tomorrow then? Certainly not. His face was teasingly outraged. I told you I wasn't done, didn't I? What more is there? You'll find out tomorrow. He reached across to open my door for me, and a sudden proximity sent my heart into frenzied palpitations, but his hand froze on the handle. Not good, he muttered. What is it? I was surprised to see that his jaw was clenched, his eyes disturbed. He glanced at me for a brief second. Another complication, he said glumly. Shut up. He flung the door open in one swift movement and then moved, almost cringed swiftly away from me. Is it Jacob? Is it our girl? The flash of headlights through the rain caught my attention as a dark car pulled up to the curb just a few feet away facing us. Charlie's around the corner, he warned, staring through the downpour at the other vehicle. I hopped out at once despite my confusion and curiosity. The rain was louder as it glanced off my jacket. I tried to make out the shapes in the front seat of the other car, but it was too dark. I could see Edward illuminated in the glare of the new car's headlights. He was still staring ahead, his gaze locked on something. His gaze was locked on something or someone I couldn't see. His expression was a strange mix of frustration and defiance. Then he revved the engine and the tires squealed against the wet pavement. The Volvo was out of sight in seconds. "Hey, Bella," called a familiar husky voice from the driver's side of the little black car. Jasmine? Jasmine? I asked, squinting through the rain. Just then, Charlie's cruiser swung around the corner, his light shining on the occupants of the car in front of me. What does any of this description give us? Jasmine was already climbing out, her wide grin visible even through the darkness. In the passenger seat was a much older man, a heavy-set man with a memorable face. Why do we have man twice? A much older, heavy-set man with a memorable face, a face that overflowed, the cheeks resting against his shoulders. A face that overflowed. The cheeks resting against his shoulders? That. Face that overflowed with creases running through the russet skin like an old leather jacket. And the surprisingly familiar eyes, black eyes that seemed at the same time both too young and too ancient for the broad face they were set in. I'm going to make this a new paragraph. Jasmine's father, Billy Black. I knew him immediately, though in the more than 5 years since I'd seen him last, I'd managed to forget his name when Charlie had spoken of him my first day here. I'm going to take that out because that's another thing where it's like overwriting. Stephanie's like, do you remember every single thing that ever happened in this book? Because Bella does, and she's going to tell you about it. Like, relax. He was staring at me, scrutinizing my face, so I smiled tentatively at him. His eyes were wide, as if in shock or fear, and his nostrils flared. My smile faded. Another complication, Edward had said. I'm going to italicize that, and I'm also going to take out Edward had said because he literally just said it. Billy still stared at me with intense, anxious eyes. I groaned internally. Had Billy recognized Edward so easily? Could he really believe the possible legends his daughter had scoffed at? The answer was clear in Billy's eyes. Yes. Yes, he could. The end! Did the sun set since I started filming? Can you still see me? Thank you for watching, and thank you to my patrons for sponsoring this video. If you'd like to see more of these, like I said, there's an entire playlist, and you can follow me on Twitch at twitch.tv/HannahLeeKidder to watch some live edits and also some other stuff. We do a bunch of things. And I'll see you next week. Goodbye.